Well, as the debate fallout falls out all over social media, it's traditional media, the New York Times specifically, that has raised more than a few ethical eyebrows on its coverage of the post-debate panic and its choice to focus singularly on Biden's caught-in-the-headlights debate performance, apparently blinded by the supernova of lies triggered by Donald Trump. But that editorial stance is backfiring big time in these blowback shots heard round the social and broadcast world. And let's remember, the Times has been grinding an axe on the Biden campaign, well, since he refused to grant them a sit-down interview. Imagine that. Check out this raw story reporting on the Times' recent editorial hit piece, "To serve his country, President Biden should leave the race." Numerous prominent liberal social media accounts unleashed on the Times following its editorial, alleging the Gray Lady was applying a double standard to its coverage of Biden compared to how it covered Trump. This is consistent with what an unnamed Times journalist told Politico, who confided to the outlet in April that Times publisher A.G. Sulzberger was quietly encouraging his newsroom to harp on Biden, due to him refusing to grant the newspaper an exclusive sit-down interview. Now the axe blade is turning against the Times, as dozens of tweets and posts have exposed the blatant bias of the venerable broadsheet. In the great video exchange that you're about to see with CNN's Anderson Cooper and Representative Dan Goldman, Goldman deftly points out an appalling lack of fair focusing of the New York Times political lens. But first, here's a great table setter from NJ.com. The New York Times, after months of accusations of slanted coverage of the presidential race and whining that President Joe Biden refused to sit down for an interview, made a startling declaration after Thursday night's debate. Biden, the Times said in an editorial, should leave the race. Now, Biden supporters who went back through the Times archives and, surprise, surprise, couldn't find a similar editorial calling on Trump, the presumed Republican nominee, to step down after he was found liable for sexual assault and defamation, twice, or found guilty in a civil trial of massive business fraud for a penalty of more than $500 million, or after he was criminally convicted of 34 counts of fraud and election interference, or when Trump led an insurrection, or when he was charged with squirreling away the country's top secrets and obstructing investigations to recover them. So none of that was enough for the Times to call for Trump's ouster. Well, then there's this Salon article regarding the Times coverage of Biden's off night of performance. Here's a quick quote. Several Democrats and the New York Times called for Biden's head. Now, hold on just one second if we can. The Republican Party is circling the wagons, defending convicted felon Donald Trump, while the New York Times and a few Democrats are ready to burn Biden at the stake because of a poor performance in one debate. Well, that sentiment was echoed loudly across the internet, as you'll see, with poignant tweets such as this. Let me understand this correctly. The New York Times are calling for Biden to drop out because of one imperfect debate, but never called for the treasonous, lying, fraudster, rapist, orange, convicted felon to drop out and still won't. And some typical responses include, their hitherto agenda has now been revealed. New York Times, your fail is complete. Is there any debate who the New York Times favors? Well, not according to the Daily Beast, which recently published this report. President Joe Biden's campaign has hit back at the New York Times after the paper's editorial board officially called for him to step aside in the race. Biden's campaign reminded Americans that the paper previously jointly endorsed two Democratic presidential candidates, Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren, back in 2020 instead of Biden. But despite being snubbed by the prestigious Broad Street, Biden would go on to win his party's nomination and defeat Trump in November 2020. A senior advisor to the president told CNN the last time Joe Biden lost the New York Times editorial board's endorsement, Well, it turned out pretty well for him. Lastly, before we show you Dan Goldman's blunt assessment of the Times reporting over on CNN with Anderson Cooper, let's quickly check out the always direct Keith Olbermann's ominous tweet warning to the New York Times, all of which is pigeon piss compared to the New York Times still thinking, in the person of this snotty clown Swan, thinking Biden's age is in the same universe of importance as Trump's madness and evil. When Trump's Nazis shutter the Times, remember that this is what you wrote. So let's see what Anderson Cooper has to say when Dan Goldman joins the post-debate chorus of clarity and indicts both the Times and CNN for their less than conspicuous coverage of the debate. Check it out.
He is blatantly mischaracterizing the disaster that was his presidency, and that got a lot of attention and didn't get a lot of pushback. But let's have another debate where actually the moderators will push back on Donald Trump's lies. He intimidated your network, unfortunately, and there was no pushback. He was given free rein to just lie as much as he wants. And that's not helpful to the American public either.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, this debate will be debated for a long time, but if the New York Times continues to gnash its editorial teeth on this cob of summer political corn, it loses its journalistic bite in favor of partisan bark by backing the mangiest mutt in this dogfight, or, to quote President Biden, the mangiest alley cat, as the case may be.